To the Clintons, Mark Penn. He is Stagwell's chairman and CEO and the Harris Poll chairman. Also joining me is Pollster and the president of Mislansky and Partners, Lee Carter. She is the author of the book Persuasion. Great to see you both this morning. Thank you so much for being here, Lee and Mark. First, Lee, take us behind these numbers. Your reaction to these poll numbers dropping for President Biden.
I think that the biggest issue that we need to be looking at right now, or Biden should be looking at, is his role with independents. I mean, that is a really low number, especially considering where he came from. 27-point approval rating among independents. He started in the high 50s, and some polls he even had low 60 approval among independents, and that's really what brought him to the White House. Losing support among the independents is really going to hurt him, and it could really hurt the Democrats in the midterms. I'm also really surprised if you look at the number of Democrats who are holding support for Joe Biden at a 77% approval rating. That sounds high, but Donald Trump, by contrast, held over 90% approval rating among Republicans throughout his entire tenure. So Joe Biden has a lot of ground to make up here.
Yeah, and Mark, what do you say? I mean, look, in the past, when you see these kinds of ratings for the commander-in-chief, you start pulling back some of the extreme policy, but that's not happening here. The president is still talking about his Build Back Better spending plan, even with the last spending bonanza stoking inflation. So you're not really seeing a reaction to this, or am I wrong? Are you?
No, you're not seeing a reaction to this in a way that I've seen, let's say, when I worked with President Clinton. If you get numbers this bad, you would say, make a pivot. You would look at what's going on with inflation and energy, and you'd repivot energy policies. You'd put through the Keystone Pipeline. You would reverse some of these policies and say, hey, we need to balance between energy independence and climate change, not all in one direction. Just for starters, you'd have to deal with the immigration issue, as was on just a few minutes ago. You'd have to deal with crime. And he's looking weak as this war drags on. He is not seen as a strong commander preventing the loss of innocent lives now, but he seems weak, unable to stop a madman going ahead with naked aggression.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, most people, you know, practically speaking, we watch this and we say, well, why can't we do anything? Well, why can't we stop this guy? You're having visions of World War II. You've got 10 million people on the move, displaced because of this. And then, Mark, this Emerson College poll finds that if the 2024 presidential election were to be held today, Donald Trump would beat Biden by 3 points. Your reaction?
Yeah, you know, in the Harris poll, I think about 64% said that if Trump were president now, Putin would not have gone ahead with the invasion. So I think you're seeing really weak numbers here on the foreign policy, on weakness, and why we're unable to stop someone who's committing now the innocent deaths of innocent lives in hospitals and schools and even members of the press.
I mean, yeah, Lee, let's face it, some of these sanctions and some of this pushback that we've seen from this administration has not gone far enough. Russia is still on the SWIFT network doing transactions in oil. They have Russian companies still in American investors, ETFs and index funds. So, what are we going to do? Sit back and watch this guy create more death and destruction? The city of Mariupol is Armageddon. Zelensky said it's gone.
It's devastating, and the American people, I think, are united for the first time in a long time around this one thing. The true evil that exists here is in Vladimir Putin. It's not in each other. And I think that the American people really want to see us come together and find a solution, because we don't want to stand by and watch this atrocity happen. You're seeing only a third of Americans are approving of Biden's handling of the situation. He's got some pretty big shoes to fill by going over there this week. And I think people are hoping and praying that we're going to see some kind of leadership, some kind of risk-taking, some kind of answer that's going to put an end to this. It's devastating on every level. And I think the president has been more silent than the American people want him to be. When you look at Zelensky, he's communicating every day. He's thanking everybody every day for what they're doing to support. And he's asking the American people for more support. And we haven't seen Joe Biden in a way stand up that we're looking for.
Mark, you have an op-ed out. You're calling on Biden to do more in Ukraine. Your op-ed, Biden's Ukraine policy must evolve. Defending freedom requires risks. Tell me more about that. Yeah, the allies and the U.S. are focused on the NATO rules. Well, I don't know that we need to be following these NATO rules in a situation where you're talking about tens of thousands of dead and cities flattened by Russian aggression, provoking an unprovoked peaceful place like Ukraine.
Well, I went back to trace, John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how he said, look, we don't want to have a nuclear war with the Russians, but in order to defend freedom, we sometimes have to take risks, and it's worth defending. And I went back to see what President Clinton said when he intervened in Bosnia and Kosovo, and he didn't argue over whether they were NATO countries. What he said were innocent people were being killed by bombs and tanks, and we have a moral imperative to do something. So I said, look, nobody wants World War III, but we can't sit idly by. We've got to give them the jets.
That's right.
And we've got to establish some red lines. No chemical weapons, no nuclear weapons, or we will come in with troops. And I think we have to put Putin on the defensive and not always be afraid of him.
Yeah, instead, President Biden tells Putin everything he's going to do and what he's not going to do. He was very clear. We are not sending troops. We are not fighting with Russia. I mean, what did that do? We're going to talk about the Xi Jinping phone call coming up when I speak with Kyle Bass, because I've got some of my own observations about that call, which we still don't know what went on in it. But Mark, Penn, and Lee Carter, we so appreciate your time this morning taking a look at these approval ratings and what they mean. Thank you so much to you both. Have a good Wednesday. We'll be right back.